Hi, everybody. Pardon my somewhat grisly appearance, if you'll pardon the pun. I know I badly need a haircut and a trim. Something came up that I thought demanded immediate attention. For those of you who follow Noel Plum 99 at all, he recently posted a video questioning the openness of Pharyngula and free thought blogs. For those of you who don't know, Noel Plum was banned from free thought blogs, and he put out a video basically asking why there aren't many or any regular dissenters who don't get banned. In order to address this, I'm going to have to go into some things. Going to have to read you part of PZ Meyers' response to this, and of course, I will link to the full post so that you can judge for yourself if I'm presenting his case reasonably, and I will also link to the video from Noel. But to get right down to it, I feel my assessment of this is that PZ Meyers strawman Noel's argument, and at the same time, in his own post, pretty much proved that free thought blogs is anything but free. And at the end, I will read the response that I wrote to PZ's response to Noel, and you can tell me what you think about that. And I'll be interested to see if PZ bothers to reply, because anyone who's seen my channel knows that I'm a YouTube nobody, so he may not bother, or he may just take it down. But I'll be interested to see what happens to my post, so I'll be following that a bit. But to give you some of the highlights of this, I'll read you some parts of what PZ wrote. And it'll give you an idea of his attitude towards people, I think, towards dissenters. I know Noel can be slightly abrasive from time to time, but I've never found his arguments to be anything but logical and reasonable. But I think the first sentence of PZ Meyers' post kind of gives you an idea where this is going. He writes, "I know you're all tired of him, but Noel Plum 99 is a sincere troll, so I'll actually answer him, despite the fact that his sincerity is really just a side effect of self-absorption." I'll break in here just to ask, project much, PZ? So he asked in his video where all the dissenters are. Why in a video, I don't understand. Isn't this a case where his written paragraphs are simpler, shorter, and easier to get through than 2+ minutes of yelling at a camera? Well, first of all, PZ, you've banned him, so he doesn't really have much of any way to post to you now, does he? So, PZ Meyers then goes on to quote a short part of Noel Plum's video, and I believe he quotes it accurately. He says, "PZ, I ask you, given the football fall of Pharyngula and the contentious nature of the subjects in question, the substantial number of people who disagree with your position, the way in which you are regarded as a lead figure in many of these things, given all this, is it really credible for you to claim you don't mind reasonable dissent when you appear, for all the world, to not have a single regular dissenter who has not been banned? You may think I am a troll, but please don't mix up trolls with idiots. If you had a couple of more dozen regular dissenting posters on these issues, your arguments would look more convincing. In my couple of months before being banned, I have never encountered a single one. Not one, nada, zilch. I have to say I haven't trolled is a bad word. I haven't examined all of the posts on Pharyngula, but I have noted a very similar pattern. I don't see a lot of dissent there, and when I do, the dissenters don't seem to be regulars. So I have the same question. So Noel says, so where are these dissenters, PZ? Is it just some incredible statistical freak of nature that you're the only person on earth with a substantial number of detractors, but somehow none of them ever bother to argue regularly on your blog, except ones who are trolls? Now, before I go into PZ's response, I must mention that in these quotes from Noel Plum, he leaves out a very, very important part, which is that Noel, and you'll be able to see this if you watch his video, specifically mentions that he understands that there's some self-selection going on here. The people who go to Pharyngula are more likely to agree with most of the people on Pharyngula, and that's true of any channel or any blog, and he freely admits this. That's important because in a moment you're going to see how PZ Meyers completely strawmans Noel's argument. So getting back to what PZ says, he says, "Oh yes, why don't I tolerate dissent from a dissenter who posted here for over 4 months, making 168 comments? I have to say, this is a remarkably stupid question." Again, PZ's arrogance pretty much shows itself, and plus 168 comments in 4 months is what? 40 comments, a little over 40 comments a month, a little over 1 a day. I don't find that to be terribly outrageous, but we'll go on beyond that. So here's where he strawmans Noel's argument. He says, why aren't 50% of my commenters Christian creationists, like the American population? Why aren't 90% of them Christian? Why aren't a third of them Republicans? We can apply this to every site on the internet. Why aren't the comment threads at A Voice for Men full of people aghast at the misogyny on display? Why aren't 10% of the comments at Rapture Ready people belittling the inanity of Bible prophecy? Perhaps Noel Plum 99 ought to think it through a little bit and wonder why he assumes that the internet ought to be a great gray panmimic of uniformity. Now, of course, by leaving out the part where Noel already said he doesn't expect that, PZ Meyers has completely strawmanned the argument. Then he goes on with further arrogance to say, but all right, I'll just assume that he's not very bright and explain the obvious. There are a number of reasons why you aren't ever going to see angry mobs of dissenters here. This is a self-selected community. We've already acknowledged that, PZ, and so has Noel. He goes on to say it's a successful center for that kind of person, meaning the people that the header discusses, liberals, atheists, and so on. And that means that people with different views, well, those that have a speck of self-awareness, implying, of course, that Noel doesn't, will know that they're going to be a tiny minority in a swarm of opinionated, outspoken, ferocious liberals. Venturing here will be daunting. The mirror of community is that there will be also a self-selected avoidance. Okay, to say that a minority opinion is going to be jumped on your blog is one thing. That's very different from banning it. If I go to a Christian site and start posting atheist ideas, I expect that most of the people are going to attack my comments. That's not the same thing as banning people who disagree. So this is a completely irrelevant comment. So then he goes on to discuss his commenting rules, but I think it's very interesting what he says here. This is my party, and I am the bouncer. I keep an eye on things, and disruptive intrusions will get shown the door. I hope it's clear that this is not a completely open noise machine with no expectations of standards of behavior. Reasonable dissent is allowed, but the key word there is reasonable. Now you note that he states from the beginning, this is my party, I am the bouncer, and yet he claims it's a free thought blog. And of course he keeps going back to the idea of reasonable dissent, and we'll get to that later on, what he thinks is reasonable, because I do agree. Horrible trolls, he claims, people putting pictures of turds out and doing other things like that. Yes, those people should be banned. But later on, we'll read what he thinks reasonable means, and this would explain why so many people get banned. And then he says, so why aren't there a bunch of reasonable people here disagreeing with the major premises of the blog? And then he says, because they can't disagree reasonably. He says, part of the reason that the culture here means people who have a minority view often charge in here with a chip on their shoulder, promoting confrontation for confrontation's sake. They're not here to have a conversation or to discuss issues philosophically. They're here to assault the fortress, to do their best to piss off everyone, or piss everyone off. Another reason is that when they aren't aggressively abusive, these dissenters are often completely tone deaf and unable to see beyond their own myopic little obsessions. So what PZ's basically saying here is, if these people aren't listening to what we've got to say, and apparently accepting it, that they're not being reasonable. They're not dissenting reasonably. And he goes on later to say, in this case, I posted my regrets that Natalie Reed was leaving Free Thought blogs, and also pointed out that something Noel Plum 99 ought to find ironic, that the trolls and the abusers are driving someone out of their own space. Well, I'm sorry to say this, but Free Thought blogs is about as mellow and easygoing a place to post as you're ever going to find. There's very little dissent there. And to say they were driven out, I think says a lot more about Natalie Reed than it does about any dissenters. But that's just my own opinion. So his concern is he doesn't want to create an environment of such unremitting hostility that people can't bear the pressure of posting on their own sites. So if you think that that's what Free Thought blogs doing, then you can't argue with that. But I have a feeling, knowing some of the past history of people there, that it's nothing of the sort. He then goes on to make some accusations about Noel Plum, which he doesn't back up. And speaking of things he didn't back up or didn't address, he also never addressed Noel Plum's assertion that no regular dissenters have ever managed to stay with the site and not get banned. I'd be interested to find out if he has names of regular dissenters that he has not banned. It's kind of a large oversight, if you ask me. Someone accuses you of banning everyone who disagrees, and you don't bother to name at least one person that you didn't ban. It tends to lend a certain level of credibility to what Noel is saying. Pardon me, I don't normally go on this long. So he says that Noel Plum got banned for a couple things. One was the complete inappropriateness of jumping into a thread regretting Natalie's departure with the deep sentiment that he didn't like her. I couldn't find that post, but it may be true. Another was the complete lack of awareness of context. It's all about him everywhere. And finally, there was the absurdity of a guy complaining about how we don't allow dissent, arguing at length in the thread, completely off topic, about how skeptics ought to be able to allow or to disallow certain topics such as gender politics. Again, I didn't have time to search all this out. I have my doubts, but we'll accept PZ at his word. I've never found him to be a liar. I tend to be skeptical of his interpretation of comments in the events. But here is, I think, one of the most key statements in the whole thing. PZ says, there's another obvious reason why some dissenters get banned. They are obtuse and don't listen. There are regular commenters here who are similarly obstinate, but at least this is their space, and they have voluntarily joined up with a group sharing similar views. If you're a dissenter holding a minority view, there's an expectation that you're actually here because you're looking to learn about a different point of view. Now let's examine that statement. What he's saying is, and he's not completely wrong, is that the people who have joined Free Thought blogs or Feringula may be obstinate, may not ever change their views, but they've joined a site that holds those views. But as a dissenter, you're not allowed to come there and voice dissent. You have to come there and voice dissent, and if you do not come around a majority view eventually, it's simply because you're obtuse and don't listen. So the arrogance here is quite clear. They're banned because they're obtuse and they don't listen. Because the only people who don't eventually see the sense and the rationality of what the posters on Free Thought blogs put out is that they're obtuse and don't listen. And as a scientist, PZ Meyers understands that people who don't agree with you are just obtuse and don't listen. That is the scientific viewpoint. As opposed to people like, theists who are open-minded and expect to examine data or listen to other viewpoints and expect that people will not always come around to your point of view. So with that scientific statement in mind, we move on, and he compares that anyone who dissents to a party where a bore keeps walking up, announcing his position on some socio-political point that may not have anything to do with what the conversation was about, and when others try to engage him, goes glassy-eyed, ignores them, and eventually wanders off to assert his great truths to a different group. He says, that was Noel Plum 99. That was not reasonable dissent. And again, I just have to go on what I've seen of Noel Plum 99, and I find this almost impossible to believe. Based on the other statements PZ Meyers has put in this, I tend to think that this is simply his interpretation. There's a couple other things he says that I'm going to address in my response to him, so I won't bring them in here. But the last thing I'll quote from him before I get to my response is, but otherwise, there are views that I find insufferably stupid and that only idiots would hold, and I'm happy to make this environment as hostile as possible to them. I'm sorry, right there PZ Meyers has said, this is not a free thought blog. If he finds your ideas insufferably stupid or believes that it's a position only an idiot would hold, he won't even allow it to be discussed. That is not free thought. He's not talking about how they state it, but simply what their views are. So he is right there admitted that he censors based on content. So, as to what I responded, and as I said, I'll be interested to see if PZ bothers to respond to this, or if so, how he does. And I'll be curious if anybody out there thinks that there's any way at all that what I wrote could be considered to be trollish. So, here it is. This is much shorter than what I've been reading. I wrote, Dear Mr. Meyers, as much as I admire your work in science and your efforts to debunk creationism, I find your post about Noel Plum to be a bit, well, offensive. I watched the video in question, and Noel very clearly stated that he would expect a large majority of people on the site to be in general agreement, just as they would on his channel or Thunderfoot's. Therefore, your primary argument about him not recognizing that this is a self-selected group is a straw man, as is the implication that Noel expects your blog to reflect societal views nearly exactly. I am also afraid that your statement, quote, Noel Plum was smugly privileged and dense, but there was some faint hope that he might actually wake up and recognize his own blinkered view. A hope that faded fairly rapidly seems to indicate that people who do not come to share the thinking of the majority are not only wrong, but should not be welcomed. You also stated that, quote, Noel Plum lasted as long as he did because he didn't come right out and shout some intolerable stupidity. This clearly implies that no one who does not eventually subscribe to your message will be banned. This is your right, and I defend that right. However, to propose that this is not censorship based upon ideology seems to me a bit disingenuous. I do not think that you see things this way, so I would not accuse you of intentional dishonesty. But I feel that you might want to truly consider whether this is a place for free thought, including rational, polite dissent, or simply a forum to promote a particular viewpoint. Both are valid and often laudable pursuits, but I have the impression that you truly do value free thought over censorship, and perhaps some level of self-examination is in order here. Regards, Patrick Doyle. Now, I think that's about as polite a response as I could have made, and I don't believe that I made any errors in fact in this in my response. I don't believe I insulted anybody. So it'll be interesting to see what PZ has to say about this. Anyway, I've gone on far too long, so links to the original video and links to PZ Meyers' response will be put in the description, and I hope you enjoy this video. Sorry to go on so long.